It is late, and you are somewhere you did not plan to be. A night bus, a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning. An airport gate after a delayed flight, or a smoking area outside a party you should have left an hour ago. Someone you have never met says something ordinary to you. And you answer with something enormous. You tell them the thing, the diagnosis, the breakup, the thing you did, the thing you are afraid of. You say it out loud to a person whose name you will not remember by Thursday, and you say it in a way you have never managed with anyone who actually knows you. Then you go home. You never see them again. And for reasons that are difficult to explain to yourself the next day, you feel lighter. Almost everybody has a version of this. It is one of the most common experiences in human life that nobody plans and nobody quite understands. And psychologists have been circling it for over a century. There is also a specific reason this happens almost exclusively in your worst moments. And that reason is not the obvious one. Most people assume the darkness makes strangers safe. The research points somewhere stranger, and it involves a number that I find genuinely sad every time I look at it. I will come back to it near the end, because it changes what this whole phenomenon means. Start with the stranger, because the stranger is a specific kind of person, and someone worked that out in 1908. The German sociologist Georg Simmel wrote a short essay simply called The Stranger. His central observation was about position rather than personality. The stranger occupies an unusual place in your social world. They are near and far at the same time. Physically present, sitting right beside you, and socially remote, connected to nothing else in your life. Simmel noticed something about what that position produces. People confess to strangers. He described the surprising openness that gets offered to the stranger, disclosures that take on the character of a confession, precisely because the stranger stands outside everything. He was writing before psychology had the tools to test any of it. He was also right. By the 1970s, researchers had started measuring it. In 1975, Zick Rubin published a study in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology with a title that gets straight to it, Disclosing Oneself to a Stranger. Rubin did not run this in a laboratory. He went to the departure lounges of a large airport and approached travelers waiting for their flights. He ran 2 experiments, asking people to write things about themselves, and he varied how much he first revealed about himself to see what came back. The results confirmed something we all half know, which is that disclosure invites disclosure. When he opened up more, people opened up more in return. But one finding buried in the second experiment matters much more for our purposes. Rubin compared 2 groups of travelers. Some were local residents, people who lived in that city and were flying out. Others were out-of-town visitors, people passing through, who would leave and never return. The out-of-towners wrote longer. Same airport, same lounge, same request, same stranger asking. The only difference was the permanence of the connection. And the people who were most certain they would never see this place or this person again were the ones who said more. Rubin called it the passing stranger effect. Today it usually goes by a different name, the one you have probably heard. The stranger on the train. So what exactly is a stranger giving you that your closest friend cannot? Here it helps to be precise, because the answer is made of 3 separate things and they come apart in interesting ways. The first is the absence of a future. Every disclosure you make to someone in your life is a deposit into an account that stays open. You tell your colleague about your divorce, and now your colleague knows about your divorce on Monday and every Monday after. The information persists inside a relationship that persists. The stranger's account closes when the bus arrives. Whatever you hand them travels out of your life inside their head and never comes back to you. There is no version of tomorrow where this becomes awkward because there is no shared tomorrow at all. The second is the absence of a network. The people you love are connected to each other and to your family and to your work. Telling one of them is rarely telling only one of them. Even with people you trust completely, some part of your mind is aware that information entering a network can move inside that network. It does not require anyone to betray you, it only requires them to mention it. The stranger connects to nothing. They are a sealed room. The third reason is the one most people never articulate, and I think it is the most important. The stranger holds no version of you. Consider what your closest people are actually carrying. Your sister has a model of you built across 30 years. Your best friend has a picture of who you are, what you can handle, how you usually cope. That model is mostly a gift. It is why they understand you. It also means that anything you tell them updates the file. When you say the difficult thing to someone who knows you, you're not only disclosing, you're also revising their picture of you permanently, and you can feel yourself doing it. Part of your attention goes to the words, and part goes to watching the edit happen in real time on their face. The stranger has no file to update. They meet you at the size you are that night, and they will never compare it against anything. You get to be the person in the crisis without also being the person who has always been the strong one, or the funny one, or the one who is doing so well lately. That is a very specific kind of freedom, and it is almost impossible to get from anyone who loves you. Which brings us to the darkness, because none of this explains the timing. All three of those advantages are available on any ordinary Tuesday. The stranger at the bus stop in June is exactly as sealed and as future-free as the stranger at the hospital in December. Yet you do not turn to the June stranger and start explaining your childhood. So what is a crisis actually doing? Two things, and it is worth separating them. The first is pressure. Distress is not a quiet state. When something enormous happens, the need to put it into words rises steeply, and it keeps rising. Anyone who has held bad news for a few days knows the feeling of it pressing outward, looking for an exit. At some point, the pressure to speak overtakes the reasons not to. The second thing is more interesting. A crisis quietly switches off your social accounting. On an ordinary day, you're running a constant, low-level calculation about how you're coming across. What will they think? Is this too much? Will this change how they see me? That calculation is the thing standing between you and the sentence you want to say. Exhaustion, shock, and grief are all extremely effective at shutting that calculation down. Not because you become brave, but because the machinery that produces self-consciousness is expensive to run, and a person in crisis has nothing left to run it with. This is why so many of these moments happen at night. In transit after a long day, in places where you're already depleted. The stranger did not become more available. Your inhibition became less affordable. There's a further piece here that surprises people, and it explains a specific frustration. Sometimes the hardest person to tell is the person who loves you most. That sounds backwards, and there's a clean reason for it. When you tell someone with a stake in you, their reaction becomes your next problem. Tell a stranger you're frightened, and they say something kind and get off at their stop. Tell your mother you're frightened, and now your mother is frightened, and her fear is a real thing in the world that you will be managing for weeks. You have not only disclosed, you have handed someone you love a weight, and part of you is already calculating whether they can carry it. So people do something that looks irrational and is actually rather considerate. They protect the people closest to them from the news, and they give the news to someone who will not be hurt by it. The stranger can absorb your worst night without consequence, because nothing in their life is attached to it. Now the number I promised, and the reason it changes the meaning of everything I have just described. The story so far has a comforting shape. It says the stranger is a special case. It says something rare and extreme happened. The ordinary rules were suspended, and you found an unexpected release valve. Under that story, the crisis created an opportunity that does not exist the rest of the time. The research suggests that story is wrong, and the correction is much sadder than the story. In 2014, Nicholas Epley and Juliana Schroeder published a paper in the Journal of Experimental Psychology called Mistakenly Seeking Solitude. Across 9 experiments involving something like 800 people, they investigated a small daily mystery. Human beings are among the most social creatures on the planet, and yet we sit inches from each other on trains every morning in total silence. They started with commuters heading into Chicago. Each person was randomly assigned to one of 3 instructions. Have a conversation with a stranger, sit in solitude and keep to yourself, or simply commute as you normally would. Afterwards, everyone reported on how the journey went. Separately, the researchers asked another group of commuters to predict how each of those journeys would feel. The predictions were clear. Most people expected the solitary commute to be the pleasant one and the conversation to be the ordeal. The actual results ran the other way. The people who talked to a stranger reported the most positive commute of the 3 groups. Solitude came last, and this was not a one-off. The pattern repeated in taxis, on buses, and in a laboratory waiting room. When the study was later replicated with commuters in London, the finding held there too. So people are wrong about strangers. That alone would be interesting. The second part is the part that stays with me. The researchers wanted to know why. If the conversation is genuinely pleasant, people avoid it so reliably. So they asked, and the answer that came back was that people expected the other person would not want to talk to them. In the London replication, participants estimated that around 40% of strangers would be willing to have a conversation with them. Every single person who was approached was willing. Read that again. The expectation was 40%, the reality was everyone. Now, put that number back against the night bus. If most people, most of the time, believe that strangers do not want to hear from them, and if that belief is dramatically wrong, then what your darkest moment did was not create an opportunity. Your darkest moment overrode. a false prediction you had been running every single day. The stranger on the night bus was not a rare exception who happened to be willing to listen. Statistically, most of the strangers you have ever ignored would have been willing to listen. You were simply never desperate enough to test it. Because on any ordinary evening, the imagined cost of speaking was higher than the imagined benefit, and the imagined cost was built on an estimate that the evidence does not support. Which means the thing that unlocked the conversation was not the stranger's kindness. It was the collapse of your own inhibition, and the inhibition was wrong the whole time. There is something quietly heartbreaking in that. It suggests most of us are surrounded, permanently, by people who would be willing to hear us, and that we require a catastrophe to find out. I want to be careful here because there are real limits to this, and a video that ended on how lovely strangers are would be doing you a disservice. Confiding in a stranger is a release valve. It is not a relationship, and it cannot do the things a relationship does. The stranger will not check on you tomorrow. They will not notice in 3 weeks that you seem worse. They cannot say the thing that only someone who has known you for years can say, which is that this is not like you, or that you sounded better last month. Nothing you tell a stranger accumulates. Each time you do it, you start again from zero, which is exactly the property that makes it feel so free, and exactly the property that makes it unable to build into support. The relief is real, and it is temporary by design. So it is worth noticing the difference between two situations that look identical from outside. One is a person with people in their life who, on one particular night, told a stranger something first. That is ordinary. That is the pressure valve working as intended, and it costs nothing. The other is a person for whom the stranger is the only available option. Someone who has found that the only place they can be honest is with people who will be gone by morning. If that second description sounds like your life at the moment, it is worth taking seriously and gently. Not as a verdict about you and not as evidence of some failure. It is a piece of information. It suggests the honest conversations have been going to the one place where they cost nothing, and the people who could actually hold something over time have not been given the chance. And if what you're carrying is heavy, or if it has been heavy for a long time, talking to someone whose job is to listen properly. A doctor or a professional or a helpline does something a passing stranger genuinely cannot. That is not a lesser version of confiding in a stranger. It is the version that accumulates. It is worth knowing that the entire model of anonymous helplines is built on this exact psychology. Someone worked out decades ago that a voice with no future in your life, no connection to your network, and no existing picture of you is easier to be honest with than almost anyone else. That is not an accident. It is the stranger effect, deliberately constructed and staffed by people trained to hold what arrives. So where does this leave the person on the night bus? Look again at what actually happened in that conversation. The stranger gave you no advice worth remembering. They had no expertise in your situation. They did not know your history and could not have understood the context. By every ordinary measure of who ought to be able to help, they were the least qualified person available. Whatever helped in that moment, the stranger did not supply it. What they supplied was an absence. No future, no network, no picture of you to protect. They were an empty room, and it turned out that an empty room was all the situation required, which raises an uncomfortable and rather hopeful question. If the thing you needed was a room with nothing in it, and if most people would have offered you one, then how much of what you carry around is being carried for reasons that would not survive being examined? You have almost certainly experienced being fully heard by someone who knew nothing about you. That happened. It is evidence about how the world works, and it is more reliable evidence than the estimate you make every morning about whether anyone wants to hear from you. The kindness of strangers is not the last resort of people with nobody. It is proof that the bar for being heard sits far lower than you have been told, and far lower than you believe on any ordinary Tuesday. That is the cue most people miss. If a stranger has ever caught you on your worst night, leave a comment and tell me where you were. You do not have to say what it was about. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.